business was originally established by my grandfather James Deeney in 1869. It actually started out as an inn and posting house and was originally a two-storey building with outhouses and stables at the back. In the late 1870s, a local contractor, in conjunction with Bat the landlord, built a three-storey building next to the posting house. This was actually the Pier Hotel. However, their money ran out just as they had completed it, and my grandfather purchased it for £200 in 1879. Then in mid-1890s, a third storey was added to the original building to complete the Pier Hotel that most people are familiar with. In this photo you can just make out the original posting house as a two-storey building. The White Hart building had not yet been constructed. My Aunt Grace was able to describe this photo in detail to me. The coach in front of the hotel is the Rathmullan Hotel coach. The coach outside the bar shop is the Porcelain Hotel coach. The jaunting car belonged to the Pier Hotel. Notice also that there is a single-storey building where the White Hart is now. Until the arrival of the railway to Faughan in 1867, Rathmullan was a relatively isolated place. The train service from Derry to Faughan and the Lough Swilly ferry service really opened up Rathmullan to travellers from the 1870s onwards. The village effectively became a transport hub for the Fannad Peninsula, Milford and northwest Donegal. From the 1870s to the 1890s, the Pier Hotel mainly catered for commercial travellers who would come via Derry and Faughan and then travel on to West Donegal. These travellers would stay in the hotel on the day of arrival, then use the hotel's coaches to conduct their business around the northwest as far as Gweedore. During this time there was a small number of tourists, and the hotel also had jaunting cars to take them on day trips. In 1884, my grandfather married Susan McElwain in the Lag Chapel in Milford. They had 4 children: my father Edward, Jim, who became a Redemptorist priest, and 3 girls, Grace, Madge and Mary, known to us as Molly. After the addition of the 3rd storey to the hotel, there was a greater emphasis on attracting tourists. A hotel brochure produced just after the extension and other renovations highlighted the local attractions, the surrounding scenery, the beach and bathing, and golf at McCamish and Portsalon. Interestingly, it also included golf at Lisfannon, indicating perhaps how reliable and regular the ferry service was at that time. In the 1901 census, all the family were present in the hotel except my father, who was at school in St Colum's in Derry. The hotel staff included Kate Sheridan, a niece of my grandfather described as a barmaid, Eddie Duffy, described as a coachman, and Kate McVeigh, a cook, Nancy Sheridan and Mary Sweeney, who were described as parlourmaids. There was only one guest, Thomas Concannon, an Irish teacher from Galway. In 1906, my grandfather died suddenly, probably of a heart attack, and my grandmother was left in charge of the hotel. In 1909, an American travel writer called Charles Basil Loomis wrote a travel book on Ireland. In the book he devotes almost a full chapter on his stay in the Pier Hotel. My Aunt Grace remembered his stay and had a copy of the book. The writer described how the hotel owner, my grandmother Susan, was still in mourning for her husband 3 years after his death. In the 1911 census taken on the 2nd of April, Susan Deeney is described as the hotel proprietor. My father, then 25 years old, is the hotel manager. Mary, brackets Molly, and Grace are also present. Madge had died. The hotel staff included Edward Duffy, now described as a car driver, Nancy Sheridan, now described as a cook, Madge O'Donnell, a housemaid, and Thomas Holland, a labourer who was the man who looked after the horses. The First World War period was probably a very busy time in the hotel. There was a barrage balloon base where the football field is now, and these balloons were put on ships making transatlantic journeys. There are many entries in the old hotel register of Royal Air Force officers who looked after the balloons. The Grand Fleet anchored in Lough Swilly for a couple of months in 1914. The commanding officer, Lord Jellicoe, had several rooms in the hotel at his disposal. He had signed the hotel register, but unfortunately the register page containing his signature was stolen. After World War I, the motor car started to replace the horse and carriage. The hotel coachman, Eddie Duffy, was actually sent to Scotland to learn how to drive a car. The Lake of Shadows went in for repairs in 1929, but never went back into service because of competition from lorries. My Aunt Grace went to Dublin in the 1920s to gain some more hotel experience. This was at the Grand Hotel in Malahide. She was there during the Civil War and recalled cycling into town while shots were being exchanged above her head between buildings on either side of the street. When she returned home, she effectively took over running the hotel end of things, while my father ran the shop and bar, as well as looking after the cattle and vegetable garden. This photo shows Grace, Molly, my father and myself outside the hotel. The next few photos show some visitors to the hotel in the 1920s and 1950s. After the coach and motor car services had stopped, Eddie Duffy, along with my father, managed the shop and bar. This photo shows my father and Eddie Duffy with a bread delivery man. In this photo is my father and grandmother Susan with a hotel customer. This photo shows my father, Eddie Duffy, Johnny Rusty McLaughlin and Tommy McCarn with an Irish press photographer Donald McMonigal. This photo shows Donald McMonigal leaving the hotel. I think the motor car outside the bar belonged to Bertie Kelly. In 1964 I took over the running of the Pier Hotel along with my wife Anne. I few years later, we built a small function room to cater for weddings, dinner dances and other functions. In the early 1980s, the function room was expanded into the area occupied by the old stables and stores. During this time, the hotel effectively became the community centre for the village, hosting concerts, bazaars, senior citizens parties and other local events. It also hosted meetings for a wide variety of local groups, including the ICA, various festival committees and the Lough Swilly Angling Club. I think it was Niall Doherty who described the hotel as the village living room. This next sequence of photos is from the last 25 years or so of the Pier Hotel, showing customers, staff and visitors alike.
Well, James Deeney, who originally built this, he came from the house over there. That's the Deeney Cares Bay. That's where he would have come from. Two-mate family now, and they were builders. In fact, those houses from Hugo McFadden's over were built by them around 1873. And the original house that was here was a two-story coach house, wasn't it?
Two-story coach house. Yeah.
Two-story coach house. And they served the people coming off the boat and took them to Milford or Downings or wherever they were going. And then there came a man to stay, and when it would be in the 1880s or so, here, he was commissioned to...
1893 or 94.
Oh, yeah. And his job was to supervise the erection of the Rosapenna Hotel, the old wooden hotel. And he stayed here and went up and down from here. And while he was here, he drew up plans for my grandfather to build what you see here today. But it was only up as far as here, this spouting here, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other part wasn't part of it at all. And it was Sheridan. A man called Sheridan, Jim.
Yeah, Sheridan owned that part where the bar is.
For the bar, yeah. And I think he got up a certain distance and he went bankrupt. And then our grandfather bought that, and that's how it happens to be part of the whole thing now. So that was in brief how it came to be.
The tiling that was done in 1895 when the hotel was built. Yeah, and that's
the window and
the original.
And also the door here was the glass.
That original door. That door is original too.
Yeah, and the glass. So the
race from here into.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, do you want me to
Yeah.
Into the original dining room? This was the original dining room of the hotel.
Yeah. And that was the wall of the old.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you're
That was
fine.
the wall of the old house. That wall there, wasn't it? The wall from the dining room into the old wee scullery that was there.
Oh, right, yes.
You know, that was how thick it was, you know.
Yeah.
You can see it.
The part that you're filming now used to be the original shop, grocery shop.
Shop was there.
Yeah.
Shop was there in the bar. It was just.
Yeah, it was through a door there.
Yeah.
What year did that change take place?
1970.
1970.
Yeah, this bar was and where the present counter and service area was our small sitting room to the front and a kitchen to the back. That's where we lived. And they lived.
I tell a story about Jim here when he in the bar when he came from Dublin. He was introducing the first draft of beer, and but he got a keg of it down, and he opened it in the bar, and the thing shot and hit the ceiling.
Did damage?
the whole thing.
More damage to ourselves than myself.
So it was an expensive barrel, expensive draft.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Telephone, and the number was Rathmullan 3. Rathmullan 3. So the Ross Park, remember that?
I remember I was having my tea in here, and Bertie Brown was on the telephone, and he was ringing down to Downing's to find out what the weather was. There was a fisherman over here, and I can still hear him asking, and they said it's very calm. The men are in. They're not fishing. It's too rough outside. And he says very calm up here. And they went out that night, and they never came back. They were all gone. Jim turned it into
along here, along this side here would have been the stable, the byres.
Four cows and
half a dozen of cows.
Yeah.
And then further down would have been stables originally, but then we would have used them as coal sheds and horse sheds and storage areas generally.
And you did your own bottling?
We did our own bottling, but it would have been roughly down here, just where we are now.
It was over. Well, we washed them down here.
We bottled our own stout.
Yes, it was a barrel every week, I think it was. So you had to wash 42 dozen of bottles.
That's right.
You had to dry them. You had to fill them. You had to cork them. You had to label them, and then you had to take them into the kitchen.
Yeah.
No refrigeration then?
No, it wasn't refrigeration. It was the other way around. You give them a certain amount of heat to get the head on it. This area here was actually built. It had been an old the wash house and where they did the washing and did maybe prepared vegetables and that sort of thing. Although the actual most of the work was done in the kitchen, and they'll show you where that is in a minute. This was just a wash house, and then we built this kitchen in 1970, and it hasn't changed very much since that original cooker that we put in 1970. The big cooker, most of the rest of the equipment would have changed. That was made of that. Yeah. This again would have been built around here back. This was the kitchen. There might have been a little office or storeroom, very narrow little place here. But oh no, sorry, it was on the outside of that. It was the storeroom was. But this was the original kitchen of the hotel. The back part of this. And the front part here was just a little lounge, and there was a little office off it. It was round at the back of it.
So the smoke room.
Yeah. There's a sitting room in our time. I don't know whether there's any reference to what the room was. Just it wasn't. I mean, we would only have called it the TV room since we had taken over in the 60s, but it was always a sitting room. And number 15 bedroom was always a sitting room as well.
And then always for the family.
But there was another particular thing about this one. There was a light door here to take you into a bedroom that had it was kind of it was an apartment, if you like, because it had a bedroom and a sitting room, and apparently someone who would have used it as his headquarters was Lord Jellicoe, who was the Admiral of the North Atlantic Fleet that was based in North Swilly before it went to the Battle of Jutland, where they were ignominiously defeated, of course.
What year was that?
So it was during the 14-18 war. I don't know which the exact year it was.
Anything to add, Eddie, at this point?
No, it was a very nicely furnished place, you know, with sofas and that painting that you have up in the house was taken from this room, I think. You know, the one that has the old pier and the...
Oh yes,
yeah. It's lovely. Who was
an
it?
oil painting.
Yes.
Oh, it was done. It was done from one of these windows.
Yes. Yeah. And it was the old wooden pier was still there at the time.
That's right.
Yeah. And it captures the way the green was and the old railings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was done by a man called Harry Dowding. And Harry Dowding was the chief stained glass artist with he was a chief stained glass artist with Harry Clark in Frederick Street. I think that's the street. Yeah. Frederick Street had their studios, and the reason that he was here was they were commissioned to do a stained glass window for the church, and actually it was the Doherty family, Anne's family, who had commissioned it, and he was the artist for staying here. It came several years.
It was in memory of their uncle.
In memory of their uncle, who had
Father John, who was the parish priest
here.
What year was that?
It must have been around 1940. Yeah, I think he died about 39 in think it was somewhere in the early 40s anyway that he came.
You know about that?
No,
The stone pier going down there was built by the landlord. That was in the last century sometime.
oh, it was.
Want to talk about that?
Let's talk about John Dee.
Yeah.
John Dee Sheridan, who was very popular in the 50s and the 60s, always writing in the Irish Independent every week in a humorous line. He spent a good bit of his holidays here in Rathmullan and here in the hotel. And he was always, when he'd come, he was a great storyteller, and all the clan used to gather and over drinks. There'd be great storytelling was a kind of a pastime. But I always remember one story he used to tell. He used to be himself and old Eddie Duffy, you know, he'd be razzing Eddie. But one day in the middle of the summer, he just went into the shop where he was, and he said, Duffy, have you a cricket bat? And Duffy says, well, there was a big demand on them there for Lords there last week, but maybe there's one left. And he put his hand under the counter and pulled out a cricket bat. And you wouldn't get to see cricket within 100 miles of this place. He always felt it. And Duffy got the better of him that.
So Jim Churchill's secretary, was it?
It was only my aunt told me that. I wouldn't remember the man wouldn't remember because I would be too young. But he transpired that he was writing. They were writing up the Churchill's memoirs or something at the time. But it was after the war.
Can you recall the day Brian Keenan was here?
He was here for a full weekend.
Yeah.
And he enjoyed himself. He came to actually open a fishing festival.
Right.
It was very shortly after wasn't that long after he was released from custody. He was only back in Ireland a few months at the time. And it was Pascal O'Hare, I think, who was friendly with him, and he brought him here. Got him to come here. He was actually living down in Westport at that stage. But he had a great weekend.
What about
a lot of most of the Irish prime ministers would have passed through anyway. They wouldn't have stayed. The only two that I remember staying were both Garrett and Liam Cosgrave. But he was in that position. Person at the time. He became prime minister afterwards. He became Taoiseach afterwards.
The Mass opened the pier.
The Mass would have been here.
And then Jack Lynch.
Jack Lynch opened the first festival.
First fishing festival.
Fishing festival. He stayed here. Yeah.
So what about guests and characters that stayed here?
Yeah.
I remember one, like it was he was sometime in the 50s. No, it must have been in the 60s, early 60s. Yes. He would come down for his. He would go for a walk every morning at 11 o'clock on the dot. He'd be back here for lunch, and he'd come in for a Guinness at 12:30 on the dot, and he'd go in for
his constitutional
on the dot.
Yes. He was an ex-British Army man. And he lived in Jersey, and he always left Jersey in the summertime and came to Rathmullan.
Very good.
And couldn't stand the crowds in Jersey.
And I remember one day that it was raining and he couldn't get out, and I happened to be upstairs in that sitting room, and he didn't realise I was there, and he was looking out the window at the rain coming down, and nobody in the room but himself, and all I heard was, damn, damn, damn.
Because his routine was upset.
Any other characters that?
Well, Bertie would have been the most colourful character that used to be, like he wasn't, like he was just always part of the bar scene, and he was so colourful in his expressions. You know, he was completely uninhibited as to how he said things, and exaggeration was his was his forte. But like you have many stories. Yeah, Jim tells about the one next door. He lived actually next door, and he had a Stanley range, and he changed from solid fuel to what do you call that, to oil. You see, and he came down to the bar and he was blowing away about the
conversion,
and so the boys to rise him said, Bertie, this oil is not as good as the solid fuel at all. Doesn't heat the water the same way. What are you talking about? You go up to that kitchen of mine there, and the Southerners doing the hokey pokey in the press.
Cylinders. Very good.
My father told me that window there, just to the left of the sign Coachman's Inn. My father told me that that's where A.E. Mason stayed while he was writing part of the book The Four Feathers, that was later into a film with Earl Flynn, I think, was the main character in it. And he spent 6 months there, and if you read the book you'll find the first part of it centres around Rathmullan and Glenalla House and the pier here. So how much of it he wrote there is hard to know, but he spent 6 months there while he was writing it. So it's a small bit of history there, and it's all about the British in Egypt, the famous Battle of Khartoum, and the rooms above there, directly above, was my father and mother's room. The next one was, I would say, the line of the poem, a little window where the sun came peeping in at morn. That was my own room. Jim was in the next room there, and I think in the summertime we had to double up. But that was our own home. We grew up here, and our two aunts, Molly and Grace, they ran the hotel, while my father and mother had the bar and the shop here at the top farm. It was only in the 60s then that Jim and Anne, they took over the hotel, and so eventually the whole part became one. This was known in our family as the big room, and it was a sitting room and had a lovely view out right down the pier with these two windows. And but in the regatta day it was turned into a bar, and I have two memories of that time. And one was when I was bringing up drinks here. There was a crowd from Rathmullan and Eamon McDade and some other man from Rathmullan, some Protestant man, and the two of them with their arms around one another, singing two different songs. Eamon was singing the soldier song, and the other fellow was singing God Save the Queen, and two of them
well inebriated.
The other one that I have, I remember bringing up drinks here till the early hours. The corvette arrested a trawler and brought them in, and here I was bringing drinks up to the captain of the trawler, the prisoner, and the sergeant of the guards.
So it was a very amicable event.
Yes. So, that memory remained with me. But it was a lovely room, because it's kind
beautiful room,
right, and especially before that potato shed went up.
Yeah.
So you had the whole panorama there of that. Yeah.
At a recent History Society event, Paddy Walsh read from a book called Old Friends, written by his grandfather, Justice Louis Walsh. This extract gives a brief flavour of Rathmullan and the Pier Hotel in the early 1930s.
Well, the book is actually about people and places that he loved in his lifetime, and Rathmullan was certainly one of them. He starts off chatting about St. Columkill and his first viewing of Rathmullan and how the scenery and everything, the stunning vista and everything got his attention. And my grandfather goes on, what the saint did not see was the Loch Swilly train, puffing and whistling on its way down to Buncrana on the other side, and the railway motorboat trying to get round the sandbank, with Johnny McCollum at the helm, and the group on the rails opposite the Pier Hotel, swapping stories or discussing world politics, whilst they waited for Bob Carter to drop anchor and throw the newspapers ashore. No doubt the Derry Journal included on it. And a certain ancient mariner, lolling on the green and greeting each returning bather with his venerable and unchanging joke. Was the water wet? Nor did the saint see the Pier Hotel itself, one of the best and kindliest hostels in Ireland, for there is so much of what, for want of a better word, I must call personality about certain houses that you may use the adjective kindly about them, just as you would of a man or woman. Though it is hard to imagine Rathmullan without the Deeneys. I mean the present Deeneys, for of course there must have been plenty of the clan about Rathmullan always, and I am sure that they had all the same softness of nature and generosity, and sense of humour and neighbourliness and brain power that distinguished all the Deeneys that I ever knew. Now this book was published in 1934, and it still applies to the Deeneys. The Pier Hotel mentioned, and this has personal for me, in that on the 20th of October 1989, my wife Bernie and I had our wedding reception in it. Sadly, the hotel and the building that housed it is no longer there. But I'm glad to say the marriage is still striking. He goes on by.
The phone number for the hotel was 3. The post office was 1, the barracks was 2, and we were 3. And I remember sometime in the 70s I was travelling back to Nigeria, and I got as far as Amsterdam, and it was being put up overnight. So I decided that I would ring home just to let them know that everything was going well. So I decided to write it out for them, because they would, first of all, they'd have to get Dublin, and Dublin would have to get Letterkenny would have to get Rathmullan, and Rathmullan would have to get the Pier Hotel. So I decided to write it out. So I went down and I showed it to there was a number of people behind the reception in the hotel, and I gave it to what I presumed was the head man, and he looked at it. And he called everybody in the office over to see this thing. Our phone number was only 1 digit. He couldn't understand that there was such a thing left in the world. So.
call it a poem, I'll call it a few memories on the paper at Pier Hotel. Come all you hear and listen, for a tale I'm going to tell about the Deeney family who ran the Pier Hotel. For 100 years or more now, the name's above the door. Many have come and gone, alas, it will be no more. Looking over the Lost Swilly and along the Golden Strand, visitors have come from afar to walk there hand in hand. Jim took over in '64. Listen a while and I'll tell you more. His poor wife Anne was dragged in two. Lay in front of her, she hadn't a clue. The years rolled by, and the family grew. They soon became part of the crew. All hands on deck and down to work. No time to stop, no time to lurk. With beds to change, pots to wash, folk to feed, you had to dash. Food to cook, tables to set, residents' needs had to be met. Think of it. Now staff have come and staff have gone, some stayed short and some stayed long. Many's a joke was often shared, and some Jim still hasn't heard. With weddings and funerals and parties and more, there was laughter and tears and singing galore. The crack could be mighty, the fun could be grand. Hard work and laughter always went hand in hand. Plates they were dropped and glasses were broken, ankles were twisted and some French words were spoken. Voices were raised as loud as a hooter. If you weren't on your guard, you could get felled with a glitter. Days they went by and all was plain sailing. Then all of a sudden they were hitting the ceiling. With rooms double booked, dining room full, no strawberry gatto, no gooseberry pudding. The cook in the kitchen dropping legs, the waitress all moaning with pains in their legs. Orders to take, food to go out. No time to stop now, the chef he would shout. Visitors came from far and near, and some like Harold came 10 times a year. They knew as soon as he opened the door that he was heading for his table for. The corners and the gardens too, along with desk high, but to mention a few. Without failure they came every year, and with them they brought a lot of good cheer. Jim's memory was the one thing that often let him down. As it did on that day, he took Anne to Letterkenny town. He left her at the hairdresser and he went to the shop, but to go back and collect her, he simply just now that the battle has been won, we hope they relax and have some fun. Up in Pier House in their own little mess, for as you all know, they are two of the best.